We are Mike and Jeannie, and we restore old houses. In 2021, we moved to South Carolina and bought a 120-year-old Victorian house. Follow along as we put the polish back on this Victorian masterpiece.
Welcome back to 1834 Restoration House.
It's hot today.
Yes, we have a heat advisory with a heat index of 108 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's really hot.
We're not going to be out here very long.
Yeah. We're going to show you a couple of things out here, and then we'll go inside the house where we have air conditioning.
Yes, thankfully it's working really well.
Yeah. All right, so check this out, you guys.
Today's program is sponsored by the generous support of our patrons. Your support helps to further our historic preservation efforts. For more information, visit patreon.com/1834 Restoration House. We have beautiful blooms. I really wanted to show you these. Aren't they gorgeous? We've got a few other trees over here that are blooming also, and they all look so pretty. I absolutely love seeing the colors. This is one of the trees, although I think you can see two of the trees there. There's one on the left just a little bit from that other one. Aren't they beautiful? These are the other two. The tops look beautiful anyway.
A while back, a company called Inkerma reached out to us and asked us if we'd be interested in demonstrating a laser. And my first thought was, well, lasers are everywhere, there's nothing special about them. But as it turned out, this laser has a couple of capabilities that I've not seen before, and we think this is pretty cool. So this unit has two laser beams in it. And what it does is it shoots a laser across in two different directions, and when you take a measurement, it can tell you how many feet across that room is. So if you need a quick measurement, you can leave the tape behind, just grab this thing and press the button, and now you know how many feet that is. So let me shoot the ceiling here and see what we get. 11.3 feet. So now we know how high the ceiling is. The other thing that I think is really cool about this thing is that it can measure an angle. So somehow it knows where level is. Let me see if I can get this into the right mode here. So I don't think you can probably see it, but it has an inclinometer built into it along with a laser. So what I do is I point the laser at something and the inclinometer will read it. In this case, it's telling me I'm at 27 degrees. And so if you need to find out what the angle is of something from far away, you just reach out, you run your laser beam up until you spot what you want, and then you read it and it'll tell you what it is. So those are some cool features. Anyway, Inkerma sent this to us and we thought you might be interested in it. Welcome back to the 1834 Restoration House Woodshop, formerly known as the dining room, but hey, you gotta use what you got, right? Before we get started, I have a story to tell you. In the South, we have these bugs called palmetto bugs, and they're big and they like to scurry around the floor. They go up walls and they're a real nuisance. Well, it turns out we got a couple in the house and we're trying to get them out. So I asked Jeannie to go ahead and get some traps and lay them down, just those sticky glue traps. And so she did. The next morning she goes in the kitchen and finds not a palmetto bug, but a field mouse. Who knew? We didn't know. We saw no evidence that a mouse was in the house, but we got him. Anyhow, we're back in the wood shop today because obviously it's just way too hot out there, so I can't work outside, I can't work upstairs because of the same problem. This is about the only thing that we can do until the weather breaks. Last week we mentioned that we're building stereo amplifiers in our new business, and this is an example of one of the covers that we're building for that. This one here is just a prototype and it's got some flaws, but we have the idea worked out, and this is new wood here. So I'm going to go ahead and process this wood and get it down to the right thickness. I've always felt that if an amplifier should have high fidelity sound, it should also have a high fidelity cabinet too. And that means not something, cheap particle board, but something really nice. And so that's what we're trying to do here. Now what I did is I took two boards here and I laminated them together to make one panel. And with that one panel, I can make that case that I showed you. Now the reason I went ahead and I flipped those boards over is I was doing the bottom side, because when you glue laminate panels like that, they don't always come up perfectly flat. In other words, one might be just slightly higher than the other. And so what that does is it planes it back off and makes it nice and flat again. What I did is I got some planks from my local sawmill. They were about this wide and they had bark on the edges, and they literally had taken a tree and just sliced it up like that. And so what we did is we brought those back here, and then we took a chalk line and we snapped that, and we were able to make straight cuts all the way down and trim the bark off and get the boards down to their maximum size that we could get. And after that, we cut them, laminated them, and that's where we are right now. So the next thing I'm going to do is run the tops through and get them down so that they're all 3/4 of an inch thick. Have you ever had an intuition when you were doing something that tells you stop? And have you ever listened to that intuition? Because that just happened to me. I thought, why do I need to stop? And then I grabbed my calipers and I looked at them and I realized they weren't set for 0.75 inches like I thought they were set for 0.65 inches. And at that moment you realize, did I just overcut these? So I set them for 0.75 and I put the calipers on here and they were just a hair over. So I just ran one more, just a whisker, just the thinnest whisker off, and now everything is perfect. So when your intuition tells you to stop, it's probably a good idea to listen. All right, so we have all the panels cut down to 3/4 of an inch exactly, right on the money. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'll just take one edge, the one I like the best, and I'll go ahead and just push it through because I want to get that perfectly flat. So let's go ahead and do that to all of these boards. When I chose this table saw, I liked the fact that it had an integrated router table in it. simply a place where you can mount your router and have it come up through this hole. You take advantage of all this cast iron plus the fence. Well, that's great, but in reality, it doesn't really work that well. Really, the best situation, in my opinion, having done this, I think, is a real router table that's dedicated to be a router table and not having to share with the table saw. But I made a special modification to this. So I took this piece off of the fence here, and I added this big chunk of lumber. This was left over from the HVAC project that we did up in the attic where we reframed the opening up there. And it seemed to be just perfect for this. I went ahead and cleaned it up, drilled the holes, and mounted it here. And so what this does is it gives me a backstop where I can run, let's see if I have a piece of wood. So the idea being is that I can run a piece of wood through the router like this. And I've got this nice fence back here. Now, this is what they call a sacrificial fence. The reason it is sacrificial is because if you look in here, you see that mouse hole right there. Some of the router bits that we use here are really big, and they need to be able to sit halfway inside so that when you run your material through there, you're only touching the outer half of it, not the whole thing. But the problem is, because it does this, this would destroy any regular fence. So by having this big chunk of lumber on here, this gets destroyed in that spot. And that takes up the damage so that you don't damage the fence. Routers are extremely dangerous and in many ways more dangerous than a table saw. With a table saw, you can kind of control the cut and you can keep that blade down out of the way. The router bit is spinning at incredibly high speeds and it has an enormous amount of torque, not unlike the table saw, but here it's out in the open. And so the danger factor amps up quite a lot. In fact, I have actually gotten my finger into a router bit before in the past, and I strive to never do that again. So what I need to do today is take this bit out of here and replace it with a different bit, and I'm going to put a decorative edge on those panels that we just made. All right, so this is the bit that I'll be using today. This is a bevel bit. And there's one more thing about safety that I need to say. If you ever use a router, I don't care what you think is going on, but please don't ever do anything with that bit unless this cord is out of the wall on the floor, because you do not want to trust your hand to a $5 switch. I loosen up the collet with these two tools right here, and now what I can do is, with some kind of finger guard, reach in there, grab the bit, pull it out, and then we can take the new bit and simply just push it down in there. Now there's always a sweet spot about where that needs to be, and that just depends on how your router is mounted. So I like to have it to where when my router is clear up to the top, my bit is just about even with the base here. So that's about perfect for this installation. Yours may be different. So now we'll go ahead and tighten those up, and we'll be right back. I'm rotating the router, and it lifts up as it rotates. So I'm going to set this up to about the point where I want to have the maximum cone on my router bit, because this is a conical bit. And right about there should be good. I'll go ahead and lock it down, reach onto the bearing, give it a tug and make sure it doesn't come out. I've actually seen bits come flying out. When I thought they were tight, I turn it on, and all of a sudden the bit comes flying out of there and lands on the floor, still spinning. I cannot overemphasize how dangerous these things are. You've got to be super careful with them. Now, the router bits are always made to cut in one direction. There is no such thing as a reverse router bit that I've ever heard of, but maybe there's some kind of specialty thing. But for the most part, in America, there is a standard, and that rotation is counterclockwise. And so the bit is going to go counterclockwise like that, which means that it's going this way. Now, when I feed my board through, I want to make sure that that router bit is coming around and taking a slice off the wood as it comes around like this. If you're going the other direction, this bit is trying to go this way. Instead of taking a little slice of wood off of there, what it'll do is it'll catch it and hurl it at whatever is over here, We don't want that. So always make sure that you know which way to push it through. In some of our past woodworking videos, you've seen me use this, and what it does is it slides in the track here, and it allows a piece of wood to be pushed through like that and to be cut. The problem is, the longer it is, the more sketchy it becomes, the harder it is to control. And we've had trouble with this in the past, trying to maintain a perfectly accurate cut. And in some cases, it could be downright dangerous under certain circumstances. So here's how we solved that. This is called a crosscut sled, and it has rails on the bottom, and these rails are designed to fit in these slots right here. And then it has a piece of baseboard, and then across the front is a piece of wood, and the same thing with the back. So these two rails right here, they give stability, because once you cut this, the two bottom pieces will be separated and then they won't stay together. So this goes in like that. It lays down in there, and then the whole sled runs back and forth on the table saw like this. Now I have to be careful that I don't ever try to cut all the way through this board, because if I do, then that's the end of this tool and it will never work again. So I have to make sure that I keep my cut down low. In some cases, it may be necessary to build rails a little higher than this, but here's the beauty of it. So I take my piece of wood, and I have a lot of support all the way down the line. So I can take that piece of wood and I can run it like this, knowing full well that it's not going to move. So in this case, this edge here is our good edge. This is the one we did on the jointer over there. So we'll go ahead and just run this through like that, and I'm going to cut off 3 pieces of wood, the top and the 2 sides. Here is the beauty of a router sled. The edge of this wood here is uneven. It doesn't match. And so what I can do is push this thing up against the rail and slide it back and forth, and I'm going to go ahead and run this to the table saw and cut just enough off of here to true it up. All right, I'm going to cut these boards apart into their component pieces. Obviously, there are 3 of each. you're standing here, so that probably means we're out of time.
We are out of time,
Okay.
yes.
All right, guys, sorry about that, but all good things must come to a close eventually. So we will pick this up later, or we'll just move on to a different project completely. It just depends. This wasn't really planned for today, but we just really couldn't do much else with the heat.
Right.
So hopefully we'll get some more interesting stuff coming along.
Thank you for watching 1834 Restoration House.